Thank you. So, of course, last week on Saturday, we were looking at the dynamics of healthy soul partnership, wound mates, and divine mirrors. And today we're going further. And we're going to kind of go through this document that's got a lot of questions. But I really want each of us to just kind of be honest and rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning that you're just a complete beginner at this particular thing, and 10 is you really feel like you've mastered it. And the numbers are just for you, although I want us to have honest conversation about kind of what comes up for us as we take a look at this. Because these are the elements, and I want to acknowledge Emily. Emily and I came up with this list a few years ago. And it was kind of what we found were like the qualities or the values necessary to really be masterful in our relationships. And it doesn't have to be, by the way, just with a love relationship. It could be, how do you apply these principles to your family, to your friends, to the people you work with. So as we go through this, take a look, because you might find, wow, I'm amazing at doing all these things with my kids, and I'm horrible at doing these things with my husband, right? Or my wife. That's kind of a common thing that I've learned working with people. So however you want to, kind of put your scores in. Hello, Laura. Welcome. And so I'm going to actually bring the document up, and so we can all kind of look at it together. And periodically, I'll kind of close this, the share screen so we can look at each other as we talk about it. Okay? Is everybody able to see it okay? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, great. So, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you at celebrating others for where they're at? As you know, I am really big on radical acceptance. I think it's the ultimate non-denominational spiritual journey that we're all on, learning to just really be fully present to what is. So how are you at accepting them without the need to change or fix them? Now, this doesn't mean you have to put up with behaviors that don't meet your values. We're not asking you to condone ongoing hurtful behaviors or habits. Certainly setting clear boundaries is really important. But how are you at really seeing people and accepting them for where they're at? And who are the people that you're really good at accepting? And who are the people that you struggle to accept with? And I actually am going to come back to us because this is like such a good topic. So I'm curious, what comes up for some people? Who has some things to share about that one? Mimi, I had a feeling. And who is that beautiful person sitting next to you?
Hi, guys.
Hi.
My business partner, and she's amazing. So
fantastic. Welcome. It's nice to have you with us.
She gets all of this information on downloads on a regular basis. So, yeah. So I would say the one that I find most challenging is honoring all of this with my children. And honoring that they have their own path, and how often that resistance is in the opposite to the direction that I think that. Now that's what I find that come up the most for me. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for being honest about that. Who else wants to share? And you can also put into the chat box, like your scores on this or what you notice. Laura, you're up.
So I noticed that what's really challenging for me is that inner child that's afraid that maybe if their behavior or something can't change, it's going to take me down. And trying to be in that deep acceptance and kind of holding the pattern, because I'm in Al-Anon, and so Al-Anon's try to fix everybody and change everything. So it's like when to know, like when to hold them, when to fold them, and how to love myself through that and accept and love the other person through that. It's really you know, it's not an easy balance. Like,
Yeah, thank you. You know, that's a good one. And that's a good one to remember when you're coaching people is the need to change or fix someone, how that connects to the person who wants to fix them or change them to the personal safety, right? So, you know, it's easy to say, oh, you're trying to control them. But in fact, again, remember, control is a strategy to meet our need for safety. So I really appreciate you saying that, Laura. That's a really good insight. Thank you. Anybody else want to share any insights that come up for you on this one? Anaprabha.
Yeah, I really like what Laura said, because I've been going on and I could be going still. You know, there's also when you have a relationship that you've had for a long time, for example, with a friend relationship, and certain behaviors have been going on, you've sort of accepted them and just went with it, then all of a sudden it's just getting like too much of a, you know, like they're like, say they want me as a therapist, right? Mm-hmm. So, or their mom, something like this, you know, where it feels like I'm giving and giving, and I need to change that relationship, basically.
Yeah.
How to do that in a way, I found it challenging, like boundaries, and I found the person can get very, you know, want it the same way and not want to change.
Right.
And so for me, wanting that relationship, but also realizing I can't just like energetically, it's taking me, like Laura says, taking me down. Like it takes up time and energy, and I just don't have that much energy to be taking care of people, for example.
Right. Yeah, it does. It does. How many of you can relate to what Anaprabha?
Thanks.
So everybody just raised their hand. You know, I was driving today and I was listening to an audiobook, and it's the book is called 11 Rings, and it's by Phil Jackson, who was arguably the greatest coach in the NBA. And it's all about his life and, of course, about his coaching. But he's a meditator. He's a Zen Buddhist. He's really into Lakota Indian thinking, and he applied practices of compassion, teamwork, and meditation to his teams. And he was talking about Carl Rogers' influence on him. You'll see how this connects in a moment. And it was a reminder that Carl Rogers, you know, is kind of who created humanistic psychology. With the idea being that as coaches, as therapists, and it's beautiful hearing this because it's very love coach oriented, that our job is to be fully compassionate for a person and to see them in the highest light, and to create connection first. It was amazing hearing him say that, hearing Phil Jackson talking about Carl Rogers and realizing that's exactly what we've been talking about here in Love Coach Academy. You know, it's like two pretty cool guys that are promoting the same thing that we're talking about here. It's like really that finding that balance of absolutely accepting someone for where they are. And we don't need to change or fix them, especially as coaches. If they want our support, yes, but it's all about starting with the quality of connection, the quality of acceptance. So it's so important for us to practice this in our friendships and our relationships, and certainly as coaches. Okay, I'm going to go back to there's quite a few questions here. So the next question is, how do you do with differentiating between the behaviors and choices that you don't like and the being themselves? You know, and you've heard me talk a lot about this, that our problem is never with the being. Our problem is with a choice or a habit that they have that triggers us, that's challenging for us. So one way is if you find yourself calling somebody a jerk, an idiot, a bitch, that's not differentiating between behavior, but that's labeling them, right? He's an asshole, she's a bitch. Well, when we do that, we've created an enemy image, right? And so just noticing, when do you do that? And how are you at really not falling into the trap of labeling someone? Okay. And kind of along the same lines, how are you at eliminating bad, stupid, or wrong? Not just from your vocabulary, but from how you see somebody, right? Like how often are you looking at somebody and judging that there's something bad about them, something stupid about them, or something wrong? And how do you do with seeing people objectively? Do you go into the relationships or stay longer based on hope or potential? How are you at seeing people objectively? And this is where it gets challenging because on the one hand, wow, we're asking you not to see people as bad, stupid, or wrong, not to judge them. But on the other hand, now we're looking at how sometimes we go in the opposite direction and we don't see people clearly. And then we get hurt or upset because they're not being the way we want them to be or the way we think they should be. And in those situations, we're projecting onto them who we want them to be as opposed to seeing them clearly. So I'm going to come back to the group now for a minute. And I'd love for people to turn their cameras on because I'm going to ask a question just by raise of hands. So if possible, I'd love for Rob and Laura and Mandy and Aaron and Angel to turn on your cameras. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm not going to call on you, but by raise of hands, who has stayed in a relationship way too long based on the potential of who that person could be? If only he was like that all the time. When we took ecstasy, he was so sweet. He was so loving. Why can't he be like that all the time? Right? You notice that I think almost everybody raised their hand. So that's like the flip side of it. It's like we don't want to judge people, but we also have to be clear on what someone truly is capable of and who it is, who they are, and who they are choosing to be. So what's come up for anybody? Have anything they want to share? Basically, these last two questions, Allison and then Mimi. A couple of our two red-haired beauties. Allison.
Oh, you're very kind. This is a sick red-haired person who is feeling very grateful for this group nonetheless, but my eyes are pretty swollen at the moment. So I recently left a job teaching at a studio for a very misogynistic boss who I kept wishing and hoping he would be able to grow in the way that he treated women specifically, and would realize that his way of relating to women was toxic and could be viewed as sexual harassment. I kept trying and it didn't get any better, but I stayed in that job for 5 years longer than I should have because he was making me very uncomfortable. And I wanted to believe that he was capable of growing beyond the headspace that he was in.
Yeah.
And I wasn't good enough about setting boundaries to protect myself. I was very concerned about setting boundaries to protect my students, but not from me. And I realized that, of course, this seems so obvious now, right? The first person you have to set boundaries for is yourself. You've got to put on your own oxygen mask. And I'm very good at sharing that advice and being wholehearted and promoting it to other people. Not so good about that yet. Although I did leave that job. I finally had enough. And now I feel really, really centered in my own values. But I also feel like, sheesh, why did it take me so long?
Well, you know, there's two sides to the coin, and I'm really appreciating the beauty of your longing to see someone in the highest light or in a higher light, and the longing to have faith and trust that they could change. You know, it's a real balance, you know, of not overly judging, but also being realistic. Our other red-haired beauty, Mimi. You had a thought.
Yes. One that I really needed to take ownership around was creating and like being upset with people who didn't have the tools and didn't have the willingness to have the tools, or had the willingness to have the tools, but they were about 3 light years off from actually being at the place that I needed them to be in order to have the conversations that I wanted to have. And then set them up to just consistently be the bad guy in my, I'm like, but he can change. And then everybody would be like, he can. And you know, if you want to stick around for that long, but it reminds me of kicking a person when they're down, that they're doing the best that they can, but that doesn't mean that they're able to meet you where you need to be met.
Yeah. And that's where clear communication comes in, like really being able to communicate about what it is we're longing for. And do they, as coaches, do they want to change? And then if they want to change, and once you guys go into the coaching program with me, which I imagine most of you or many of you will, we're going to be working on that. Like, how do you set up specific steps and markers to hold people accountable to make changes, to do things differently, right? And that's definitely something we're going to be working on in the coaching program. I see a hand that I believe belongs to Laura.
I just have to say something kind of funny, but it's true. I literally had to make a deal with myself, but I never could stick to it, to not take ecstasy with anybody in the first 3 months, period. But because all of a sudden you could just be hanging out with somebody one day and they're like, okay, it's fine, we're hanging out. And all of a sudden you're totally in love the next, right after you've taken even a half a hit of ecstasy, which is ridiculous. And never again.
Yeah, and don't try and solve problems by taking ecstasy, right? Okay, let's just take ecstasy. And it's actually interesting, to be really honest. I haven't done ecstasy in many, many years, but I went through a period of my life where I did, and I enjoyed it. And I have a couple right now that I'm working with, and the wife really wants me to facilitate a microdose ecstasy journey between she and her husband. And I haven't said yes. I'm contemplating it, but it's actually something that is in the field right now. All right. I'm going to go back to our document. So continuing on, do you look at relationships clearly, or do you fall prey to perceived fantasy? He should take care of me, pay all the bills. She should want to always have sex with me and to always want it, right? Or whatever it might be. Like, you know, where do you project? To what degree do you really see people as they clearly are? And to what degree do you fall into fantasies of how you think the other is or should be? It's kind of what we were talking about. But going further, how do you do with expectations of yourself and the other? How do you do with expectations? And if you have expectations, do you have clear agreements about those expectations? I'm going to add that.
Hey, Scott.
Yes.
That was going
Angel.
to be my question is, you know, there's one side is, well, if you're the one doing the projecting and you either are aware of that or not aware of that, but what do you do when you're the one being projected on in a relationship, you know, and you feel like, yeah, they have all of these expectations and hopes and dreams of what you will be like, but you clearly are not, or don't intend to, or don't see yourself being that?
So see if they can really grok that. Like, do you understand that I'm not going to fill in the blank? I don't want to fill in the blank. It's not a goal of mine. It's not an intention of mine. It's not what I have. Can you let that go? And then, of course, ideally, if it's someone that you are deep with, exploring why do they have that expectation? Why do they have that? What is it about that is going to help them to feel safe or meet their fantasy? You know, I mean, certainly, and it's a hard one. I mean, you know, I can look at every significant relationship I've been in, Karina, before that, Emily, before that, my wife. And clearly there were places where I kind of wanted them to change and places where they wanted me to change. And then sometimes we're in that moment where we think we really do want to change, but then we still don't have the skills or the tools or the capacity, you know? And everybody grows, like Mimi said, everybody grows at a different pace. But I think it all comes down to clear communication, really being able to clearly communicate about it.
Well, I guess even with clear communication, you know, it comes down to if we talk about these unmet needs and these, you know, these desires or fantasies, what the person wants, and even when you get to the unmet needs beneath those, I guess the practice would be in, well, how do you meet those needs either within the context of relationship or just meeting those needs otherwise? But I think, sorry, just not going off track here, but my truth, I suppose, would be that pretty much in any relationship, there's always going to be some unmet need. Absolutely.
We should never expect any one person to meet all of our needs. I mean, it's not a realistic thing. And that's a really important, and some people believe that when I find my true soulmate, when I find the right person, they're going to be like some perfect greatest hits package, right? Right? You know, they're going to make love to me like Joe, and they're going to have the money of Paul, and they're going to have the spiritual wisdom of Angel, and, you know, they're going to have, like, you know, that we're looking for a greatest hits package, right? And it's not quite how it works. Yeah. I'm seeing twinkles there.
Yeah, I'll leave it there. I guess the challenge I have is that I tend, in my past few relationships and this one, I tend to get put into, oh, he's the perfect package kind of guy. And living up to that, and living up to that provides challenges. But, you know, the conversations happen, and it's just more opportunity for growth and exploration. And so, yeah, accepting of non-perfection from both parties, I think, is the growth area.
Yeah.
I'm done. Thank you.
Oh, well, hopefully not completely done. I always appreciate it. Let's twinkle Angel. I know we didn't twinkle others, but we'll give a little twinkling because it's hard being perfect. It's hard being an angel, right? Allison.
One thing that I wanted to share an insight about my own relationship because I've been in my relationship longer than I've not been in my relationship in my life. So, and I find that we have to remember that we're not married to only one person. That person is growing and evolving and changing over time. And so things that maybe are impossible at the beginning of the relationship can become possible later, and vice versa, right? My husband, and I don't think he'll mind me sharing this, he is not good at remembering holidays at all, ever. I used to buy my own Mother's Day. Just sign, I enjoy everything hard. I know it's hard for you to remember, but in the last 2 or 3 years, he started buying his own cards and remembering it. And, you know, and I made it funny. Of course, at one point I was really hurt by it because I had my fantasy of like, of course my husband would remember Mother's Day and do something special for me. Of course that would happen. Well, there's no of course in relationships. I think what's really important that I'm learning over and over every day is that if I don't state what my needs are, I cannot expect my partner to read my mind. And if I don't tell my partner how important something is to me, then they may not think it's that important. So like I'm a big fan of stating the obvious continuously until I'm annoying, and then stopping for a while and then stating the obvious again. And I don't mean that in a flip way, actually. I mean, sort of flip, but what I have learned for many, many, many years is that the obvious that is obvious to me is not obvious necessarily to my partner. Yeah. And so I should not expect that this thing that is staring me in the face is actually even tapping him on the shoulder.
Right. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. And it's a good reminder. I also just want to acknowledge there's some really cool stuff going on in the chat box. So I'm really appreciating some of the comments that I'm seeing going there. And I actually really want to, I'm going to read what Anna Cabrera wrote because I think it's a really good point. She writes, I was thinking about the difference between fantasy and seeing the divine potential, higher vision that leaves the possibility of opening to what we want versus an ache and a pulling on the other person that can create pulling away or stress. So I like that, the difference between fantasy and seeing the divine potential. And again, that's where to really differentiate requires communication. That's where there's got to be quality communication. Okay, let's go back to our little list here. So next is, how do you do with taking responsibility for your own needs and values? Really being clear what it is that you need, that you need to get a Mother's Day card, right? Or whatever it might be. I mean, we really being clear, I don't mean to be flippant, but since we just heard, but listen, there's some people that is like a real strong value, right? So we have to be responsible about knowing what we need and knowing what we value, and then effectively communicating it. Oops. And how are you at getting clear about what others need or long for? Getting clear about what others need or long for. And are you better at one than the other? Like, I'm much better at getting clear on what someone else needs than I am about knowing what I need and expressing it. And that really came up in my relationship with Emily. Emily is very clear on what she needs and very good at asking for it and going for it, like, all the time. And I'm more of a people pleaser and more kind of, especially in, relationship, okay, making sure her needs are met. And that's pretty common for mothers. I'm not a mother, obviously, but mothers tend to be much more focused on what their children need or what their husband needs or what the family needs than on what they need. So actually I'm going to come back to the group and just see, just first by raise of hands, who's better at knowing what you personally need? Who's better at what you personally need? And who's better at really being in tune with or asking what others need, your family or your close people? Yeah, so it's almost all of us, right, are more on that side of the fence, which is kind of interesting. So again, as we take these little tests, as we look at these things, it gives us an opportunity to see, okay, where can I grow? And I really, in my relationship with Emily, it helped me to understand why I need to get more clear on what is Scott really wanting? What am I really needing? What am I really longing for? And then I got clear on it and we broke up. So there you go. Okay, going back to our little list here. I'm appreciating Mimi laughing hard. Thank you, Mimi. I'm appreciating that. So yeah, again, communicating clearly and compassionately. Compassionately. How do you do with that? Do you withhold? Do you withhold expressing what you're needing? Do you hold back for fear? Often. I find often in relationships that I'm working with who's challenged, they've stopped asking for what they need or want for fear that they're not going to get it or they're going to be disappointed. Mimi has some of this.
Okay, that was like a big thing for me. One of those like core abandonment things is that when I ask for what I really, really want, that the other person is like, fine, I have to go. So that's why I was like really activated when you said that, because I was like, oh my gosh, that's hysterically funny and so very painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to honor that moment because just because I have this attachment to how beautiful the two of you like showed up together. And it really, I have a lot of sadness around, gosh, like, I think people should be able to ask for what they want and not walk away. I think that that's just a me, but when I saw that reflected in you, I was like, I had a lot of fear around, oh my gosh, if I really show up, what if I do all of this work and then the person goes anyway? What if I like show up in full vibrancy and then the person is like, okay, yeah, well, I don't want that. And so it's interesting, that dynamic. I just really wanted to honor your journey because I love both of you. I love what both of you have brought to the table and the exquisiteness that the two of you are as humans. And even though I was laughing about it, I was also like, oh, that really touches my heart. So thanks for being so authentic in this journey, Scott. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Twinkle myself there. And for what it's worth, she still lives next door. Her mother still lives in my house. Debbie and she have become like the best of friends, and she's over here a lot these days. They're the juice sisters. They're making juice all day long, which I'm enjoying drinking. So, yeah. I think there is something that I thought of, not about me and Emily, but, okay, what if I do all this work and he still leaves? The relationship still ends. Well, maybe the relationship was serving as inspiration to do the work. Really, maybe that, and what I'm about to say is not cynical. So I want to clarify what I'm about to say. I said, but all relationships do end. All relationships do end. People die. My wife died. People do move on. They change. All relationships, including a relationship to our body, does come to an end. And so ultimately, we do need to remember that the joy is in the journey, not in the destination. And if we're learning how to love ourselves and love each other more fully, if we're learning how to express what we need and care and ask about what other people need, this is, whatever the inspiration, the intention hopefully is not just to keep the marriage going, but it's to be a better, more well-rounded human being. Yeah. So, but our egos want to believe that, okay, I've been a good boy. I learned, I took Scott's class 3 times. And so, I want to get my reward. And my reward is that you're going to love me the way I want you to love me. Right. I can relate. We all have a certain sense of entitlement about the work that we do, right? I'm doing all this inner work. I'm doing these classes. I'm doing these workshops. I'm reading these books. And therefore, I'm entitled for you to be the way I want you to be because I'm doing all this hard work, right? I mean, who could relate to that? Who has some of that going on inside of you, right? Yeah. So, I see Israel in the background. Nice to see. I'm glad you're here for this one, Israel, because this is all about you and Mandy's relationship. Okay, let's go back. So, how do you do with using conflict as a way to grow closer in understanding each other? I love this one. When a conflict arises, when a difference arises, are we using this as an opportunity to understand ourselves more fully and understand the other? Or are we stuck in bad, stupid, wrong? Are we stuck in, the polarization of it? But boy, when we can use conflict or differences as a way to grow closer to understanding each other, that's awesome. So how do you do with that? We are going to do on Saturday's class, it's going to be how to set boundaries with compassion. How do you do with setting boundaries in a compassionate way? How do you do with finding that balance of being clear in your agreements, clear in your no, clear in your boundaries without being overly aggressive or hurtful? How are you at having compassion for the other person's response to your boundary without changing the boundary. And again, Saturday's class is going to be all about setting boundaries with compassion. So how do you do with it now? And then if you're anything less than a 10, make sure you come to Saturday's class. How are you at committing to personal growth and emotional accountability? I think most of you probably are at a very high level because you're spending Wednesday night at this class. So I think all of you probably get a pretty good score on personal growth. But emotional accountability, and we really should actually, I think we should make these separate. Can I do that? Yeah. So who wants to share their understanding of what emotional accountability is? Who wants to define it for us? So it's not just me. Laura and then Mimi. What is emotional accountability?
Well, my inner child says that emotional accountability is, somehow having a container around all of it when it gets uncomfortable, and maybe hopefully having some agreements set up so that, the accountability, like it's not easy to establish in the beginning, but once you do, it's not that the person can't be accountable, but it's just hopefully you have this container where we don't get the worst thing I think for all of us is to feel abandoned. And I know that the worst thing in a relationship, stonewall, is the death knell of a relationship, stonewalling, or any form of that. So, but we got to make it safe for both people. So I don't know if that's the technical definition, but that's my inner child's definition.
I like that. Let's all twinkle little Laura and her definition. So what I'm really hearing is emotional accountability is about creating safety. All right. Mimi, what do you want to say about emotional accountability?
I appreciate, like around my children, they'll notice if they'll say, Mom, you look like you're angry. And so taking accountability before I have a conversation of what's going on with me. Mm-hmm. And the intelligence part of that would be going and taking a walk and coming back with less of a charge around whatever is going on for me emotionally if I want to engage in a conversation with people.
Nice. I like that. Twinkle Mimi. Anybody else want to add anything about emotional accountability? What it means to you? Angel.
Okay, speaker. Emotional accountability is taking responsibility for your own emotions, recognizing that though others trigger you, or you get triggered from others' behaviors, that you are the one that has domain over your emotions or how to allow them to be expressed or not. So self-responsibility for my feelings are my feelings, and they're not because of you.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful definition. So thank you. I think, Mimi and Laura were presenting strategies to manage emotional accountability, and Angel, that was a really nice kind of clear definition of it. So thank you. Everybody clear on it? Debbie, we get to hear from Debbie Garcia.
Hey everybody, can we add in the responsibility of also the consequences for our emotional responsibility? So
let me go to the screen share, and what is it you'd like me to add? And I will do it. It'll be the Debbie Garcia Memorial Edition.
No, just adding into the definition of emotional responsibility and the consequences around that as well.
Okay.
that derive from being responsible. And Angel, that was really great. All of you guys just rock.
Managing the consequences of our emotions. Would that be accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Cool. Okay, thank you. How do you do with seeing the other as a powerful mirror to your own self-love, growth, and personal development? How do you do it seeing the other as a powerful mirror to your own self-love, growth and personal development. Of course, we've talked a few times in this class about sacred mirrors, seeing each other as sacred mirrors. How do you do with that? How committed are you to actually speaking your truth, but doing it in a loving, compassionate, and self-responsible way? The flip side of that, where we go astray, is if we feel entitled to be snarky, right? Sometimes we feel entitled. Well, you hurt me, therefore I'm entitled now to be unkind in what I say to you, right? So it's usually a sense of, I'm hurt, therefore I'm now entitled to react instead of respond. So how do you do with that? And are there particular people in your life that it's easier for you to stay loving and compassionate, self-responsible with, and other people in your life that it's harder? And that's almost always the case. I see Angel. By the way, if I don't see you raising your hands, because when I've got it on screen share, I can only see like 4 or 5 people. So if you're really wanting to speak and I'm not calling on you, you're welcome to just unmute yourself and come on in, because it means I don't see you. The people that tend to be showing up on my little thing down has been Anaprabha, Angel, and Mimi are the ones that I've been seeing. So Angel, you have something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute here. Yesterday I held a men's group here. I do a weekly Wednesday men's group. And an interesting part of that conversation was, because it was the connection between self-love and speaking your truth, owning your truth. And the question was raised like, when we love ourselves, then we speak our truth? Or is it that when we speak our truth, then we're truly loving ourselves? And it could be looked at from both directions, but what came through very clearly for me personally was that unless you are owning your truth and speaking your truth first, there's no way you can be loving yourself. So if we speak a half-truth, or withhold some part of ourselves or some part of our truth in order to love somebody, that's just a coping mechanism. We're trying to protect them or protect ourselves, which is not full, really loving. So in my view, you can't love yourself or love somebody else, but we're talking about self-love here, until you really are willing to accept and speak your own truth.
Wow, beautiful. That's truly sage advice. Truly sage advice. Thank you. Anybody else have anything they want to share about what we've just gone over? Yeah, Laura.
I always quote Gay and Katie Hendricks, but he wrote a whole book called The 10-Second Miracle. And the 10-second miracle is that you can heal anything in a relationship by speaking a 10-second truth. It doesn't have to be unkind, but it just has to be your deeper truth about something, and it can free up years. Like if people have had a pattern for like 30 years where they weren't functioning, if they could just speak a deeper, complete truth. Anyway.
Yeah. I would say that's usually, that deeper truth is something very vulnerable. It's a vulnerability. I act like this because I'm afraid blank, blank, blank. I would guess that's usually what that truth would be, is a vulnerable sharing about the real reason I say, or the real reason I do, is because I'm longing for, or I'm afraid that. Yeah.
Or, honey, I wrecked the car.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're going back. So, how do you do at choosing curiosity and seeking to understand the other when they are triggered, instead of making them wrong, reacting, hiding, etc.? How do you do with that? I'm going to say seeking to understand when you or they. How are you at really committing to embodying the 12 adjustments? Of course, we did an entire class on the 12 adjustments. If any of you missed it, please go back into the Love Coach Academy trainings YouTube channel that I've created just for you, and watch it. The 12 adjustments rock. They really are. I love the 12 adjustments. So how committed are you to really embodying it? Identifying when there are life alienating thoughts, patterns, and beliefs, and choosing to shift to make life affirming adjustments. How committed are you to that on a scale of 1 to 10? In fact, that's so important to me. I want to ask each of you to put your score in the chat box. How committed are you to learning and practicing the 12 adjustments? And be honest. Of course, I'd love to see everybody say a 10, but be really honest. Where are you? What on a score of 1 to 10? Really, where are you with? Yeah, I really want to do this. Well, we got a lot of 8s. Beautiful. Angel, the question is, how committed are you to learning and practicing the 12 adjustments? Moving from resistance to willingness. You've seen the chart before. Nice. Yeah, curiosity is definitely one of my favorites. Curiosity, acceptance. Beautiful. I like that. I like what Allison wrote. I'm totally committed, but I am adjusting for my humanity. That's worthy of a twinkle. That was a good one. All right. And I'm loving what everybody writes. When I acknowledge one particular person, it's not to not acknowledge all of you. Thank you. I see Anna Cabrera wrote something kind of like that. Committed as a 10, capable depending on my level of stress or exhaustion. Absolutely. Yeah. When we're exhausted, when we're in survival, it's very hard to be conscious and to grow in greater consciousness and awareness when we're in survival, whether it's overall survival or momentary survival, right? So, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay. By the way, there are 43 of these, I think, so that's why I'm zipping through as quickly as I can, but I also really love what you all have to say. One of my favorites. How are you, I got up my little props here, at managing your reptile brain? How are you at slowing down and acknowledging when you're feeling scared or triggered? How are you doing with that? Are you using self-care and self-sourcing? Are you practicing connected timeouts? How are you doing at choosing connection over being right? And where are the relationships where you get stuck in right, wrong, good, bad, power struggle over connecting? Where are the relationships where you get stuck in being right? In fact, that's another good one. In the chat box, relationships where I get stuck in being right or getting my way are, so pop in the chat box. What's the relationship or relationships where you're most likely to get stuck in being right or wanting to get your way? I notice I want to be right when I get scared. Oh, that's so sweet. Such Laura. Yeah. Beautiful vulnerability. Thank you, Anna Cabrera. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Really appreciating all of your honesty on this here. Yeah. So hard with our children. Mm. Mm. Of course, we tend to get stuck in right, wrong when we're talking politics, religion, or sexual preferences. And I mentioned, of course, I think we all know about religion and politics. It's a truism in our culture. But as a relationship coach, I've really learned and observed that sexual preferences bring up about the same level of right, wrong, and potential hostility as politics and religion. What's sexy to one person is disgusting to another. What's really, really juicy to one person is gross to another, right? And people have really strong beliefs around sexual preferences. Transgender, gay, kink, those things trigger pretty big stuff. Pretty big stuff. All right, we're going to go back. Thanks for putting in the answers, everybody. And it's a nice way to get to know some of you. All right, how do you do with choosing transparency and authenticity with yourself and with others? Really choosing to be transparent. And again, some people you feel safe to be transparent with, and some people you don't, right? It's easy to ask for safety and transparency, but remember, it goes hand in hand with safety. If we're asking for honesty or transparency, we have to make it safe. We can't punish that person for being honest. How are you at making clear agreements and then sticking to those agreements? How are you at working to create a win-win, finding the balance of care for yourself equally with care for the other? Oh, this next one's a big one. They all are big. How are you at honoring and having compassion for your own shadow side? How are you at having compassion, honoring, and managing your shadow side? And how are you at honoring and working with other people's shadow side? Now, this does not mean enabling or condoning ongoing behaviors that have harmful consequences. And I'd love to hear some definitions of shadow side. I don't know if that's where you were going to go, but I'll call on Angel first. And Angel, share whatever you wanted to share. But then I'd also love to hear your or other people's definition of shadow side.
I just wanted to go back to the one about creating clear agreements, because this too came up in my conversation yesterday. I think it's a good point, is when we're making agreements, how often do we make an agreement or say yes to something when we're not really a full yes? We do it out of politeness, out of it's the right thing to do, out of our perception of how it will frame us in that person's eyes, or if our intention is really because we want to get something out of making this agreement. So this for me really is a key one, particularly as a man, because it's an underlying aspect of self-integrity, is again coming back to this whole aspect of being and living your truth. but how often do we make an agreement that we don't really take the time to really feel into, am I a full yes for this? And I'm entitled to change my mind later, but I think in my experience, many of us make agreements when we're not really thought it through, felt it through adequately to give a real full yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Raise your hand if you can identify with that, right? And I want to add one more. A lot of times people, especially to be honest, men, will say yes just to end the damn argument.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'll clean the garage, right? Okay, fine, you win, right? Just because they just want it to be over with, right? Who can relate to that? I like what everybody writes. So again, I don't read everything in the chat box, but I just want to point to what Anna Cabrera wrote, saying yes out of fear of retribution if we say no. That's a good one. That's a good one. And, for those of you who missed it, I did do a class, I guess it was about a month ago when we did the class on how to say no and how to hear no. Who remembers that class? Yeah. So if you weren't there for that class, go back and watch the video of it, because we go into a lot of Marshall Rosenberg wisdom about only saying yes if you're kind of the things that Angel is referencing, 100% yes, you're doing it out of a longing to meet your needs as opposed to out of reaction or fear. Anna Cabrera, I think you're raising your hand.
Duck. I mean, his definition of saying yes was like a full joy. I just love that, kind of take a picture of that feeling and hold it as a possibility.
Yeah, Marshall used to say we should only say yes with the joy associated with the child feeding hungry ducks.
I mean, I guess I want to say, like, of course, don't feed the ducks, but the idea of it,
Right.
No, you can't feed them bread.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Laura.
I just wanted to talk about the shadow side. I wrote in the box, it's usually, what I find is it's a disowned part of myself. And it's also a survival mechanism that I developed, and so it's like when I notice that something really irritates me, it's usually a disowned part of me, and it's probably a shadow thing. And but anyway, can I just talk about the ducks for a second? Because when I was 5 years old, my mom took us to Reseda Park to feed the ducks. Okay, you guys? So that night or the next morning, I got up really, really early. I filled up the bathtub and I put a whole loaf of bread in the bathtub because I was waiting for the ducks to come.
Oh, that is so sweet. And I know Reseda Park, and I know exactly the pond you're talking about at Reseda Park. It's bringing back my own memories of going to Reseda Park.
And my brother had to clean up all the gooey bread.
That's really sweet. You felt if you fill the tub, the ducks will come.
The ducks will come.
Right. That's really sweet. Really sweet. We're getting a lot of Laura's little girl today. And yeah, the shadow side is usually, we call it shadow side because we feel like we have to hide it. We have to hide the addiction or hide the compulsion or just hide the habit or hide the preference, right? A moment ago I was talking about sexual preferences. Most sexual preferences start off in the shadows. They're hidden. And sometimes they stay hidden for life, right? So, anybody else have anything else they want to say about the shadow side? Daniel, we haven't heard from you today. I'm glad we get to hear from you.
Okay, can you hear me? Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So shadow, like a shadow would be a belief about myself that isn't true. Mm-hmm. Like my needs don't matter as much as your needs. And that could also have an impact on the agreements that I'm making. I could be coming from my shadow side and agree to something coming from the place that I believe that my needs aren't as important as your needs. and then I would make an agreement that isn't really my truth.
Thank you for that. Who can relate? Yeah, just about everybody. Thank you, Daniel. It's beautiful. Anyone else? Anything you want to share about shadow or about honesty or what we've been talking about, transparency? Aaron.
Yeah, I'll share about shadow a little bit. Good evening, y'all. So I've had a big revelation just exploring like the fourth dimension of our thoughts and the spirits they create. And I've discovered how there's this line of like good vibe and below that. And we've called those like fallen spirits. Those are to me the byproducts of what we call shadow. And what I've found is with our own human cognition, we're creating those out of the pure life force that we breathe. So it's a big revelation to realize that all those shadow spirits or fallen spirits, it's our gig to ascend them, really. And it's because they see us as their creators. Like when you really look from the astral realm, they're like, you created us and you're letting us rule you. You call us fears and fallen spirits and you let us run you. You're our gods that created us. So it's radically eye-opening to see that fourth dimensional perspective of how they see us as their creators getting ruled by them when we're to truly rule them with our controlled emotion and stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
That's obviously very profound. Like I'm kind of like woo, okay. Can you give a specific example just to kind of help? Because I'm loving what you're saying, and it's really
sure. Any thought, form, or emotion, what I call spirit, like we're starting to understand consciousness like we've never had before, and that is that our neurons produce thought forms in chemical form, and when we inhale, we're taking in all these molecular structures of life force. And with our cognition, our neurons, just like trees in the forest produce oxygen, our neurons are producing chemical molecules, molecular structures that we express into the ethers. And we're literally impregnating what we might call the womb of life, the womb of love, goddess Ishtar or ethers, whatever you want to call it. And it just goes to show you how humans are truly gods of word. That's what the word hue of human comes from. It's an ancient Egyptian mythological god. And so, you know, if you look at like I like to use physics when I talk about spirituality, because whatever spiritual tradition is most popular is like the strongest quantum script running reality. And so with that, these stories of spiritual traditions create the collective psyche, what physics calls the quantum unified field of consciousness. And so when we breathe in pure life force and exhale our thoughts, because with the right technology, you could exhale in a canister and read every single thought you had in that breath in molecular form.
Whoa.
Yeah. So this is why, you know, we found out we can be immortal simply by honoring this divine law of goodness, good thought, like what I call love and above. And this is why in this conversation tonight, it's been tricky for me to respond, because I've had this unique role where I've been made aware of this, and I know that we can all stop dying, stop diseasing, stop all suffering. This is physics, physiological fact. Dr. Bruce Lipton confirms that we go immortal when we stay in a good emotion. And so he's got a book called The Honeymoon Effect. And he found that living in that emotion of the honeymoon effect stops cellular death and initiates regeneration. So when you say something like this, don't make things right or wrong, we're gods who kill ourselves with anything less than a good vibration of thought or emotion. And so that's an important thing to be aware of. That's something very factual and something we all applying that knowledge literally will make us go immortal. And what's so cool is Dr. Joe Dispenza confirms that he studied monks, Tibetan monks, like his buddy knew the Dalai Lama, and they hooked this guy up that was able to go like levitate and pass through walls. And they found with his cognitive projection of compassion, he subatomically restructured matter to be under his dominion as God. And it's like we've got it figured out. We know how to ascend this world dimensionally. We know how to go immortal and really become limitless gods again. So it's pretty exciting.
Very, very deep, very deep. And there's something I got to show you. There's two books right by my bed on my nightstand. And look at what one of them is. Bruce Lipton, The Honeymoon Effect.
Nice.
And then my other book is Reverend Michael's Spiritual Liberation. These are the two books I'm reading right now.
Nice work.
So that's kind of cool. Mimi.
I thank you, Aaron. I really loved what you had to say. One piece for me that I've in full ownership of that space is that I've spent many years in. I had spent many years in the spiritual, prior to that, the religious communities, and one core piece to me was a lot of the quote ugly stuff never got talked about, and it was kind of spiritually bypassed, like it didn't get really looked at.
Right.
And to me, I'm just going to go off on a little piece of that, and that is that I'm in the same thing. I really like quantum theory, quantum healing, and I really like physics. And one portion of that to me is the frequencies that we communicate at with each other, but instead of thinking of things as, which is what I really love about this class, I'll hone it back in here. Instead of thinking about it as something that's crippling us, it's looking at it with deep empathy and compassion and raising the vibration of helping us to recognize that you're not isolated. You're not isolated in this journey. We get it as a group of people. We're developing all of these tools now. And that for me, that consciousness that is kind of like, it feels like it's out here right now, from AI to computers to quantum theories. We're ingesting it and we're starting to say, there's nothing that is separate from me. And the more that we practice these tools and the deeper that we go with these conversations, the more that we're able to access this truth about ourselves, which is there's nothing that separates us when we let go of the judgments around truly, authentically, deeply showing up. So I just really want, Aaron, thank you so much for saying all of that. And I was like, oh my God, she's not all of that yet. But I also am in this like, I feel like, Scott, you're one of the people that takes it from out here and gets rid of the spiritual bypass and just kind of delves it in with the empathy and this, and you're willing to show up and say the things that need to be said in order to bring it from out here into the hearts so that we can.
Yeah, may I respond to that real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. So glad you brought that up, because we have been taught so much to bypass like negativity. And I was even feeling that, because I'm like, hey, it's killing you. Like, don't go there. But we must go there because they're in us, right? So I'm so glad you brought this up, because what I've found is the key is to take on this ultimate responsibility we have as gods of spirit, who created spirits with our cognition, to take responsibility, but compassionately, because all these fallen, like bad guy spirits, we created them. And we turned those spirits from pure love light that we're breathing to whatever negative thought we have. So what I found is the key to empathetically and compassionately ascend those spirits, because we have to ascend the fourth dimension to go to the fifth. So like, we got to embrace all these fallen spirits and bad emotions in ultimate compassion. And that's not toxic. You know, when you embrace shadow with ultimate love and unconditional love and compassion and seek to enlighten and uplift it, you're only in a life-giving practice right there. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because we're not to bypass anything. We're supposed to really embrace it.
Yeah. Beautiful. You know, a book that I recommend is the book Conscious Recovery by my coach. I have a coach named TJ Woodward. And his approach to dealing with any addiction is to make it conscious and to really not see it as bad or wrong, be aware of the impact and the consequences, but to really understand where does it come from. And I learned a lot in my coaching with him. It's really helped me understand my shadow side, or shadow sides in a much deeper way. And yes, everybody should watch 2 shows on Netflix, Sense8 and Messiah. Are you guys all aware about Messiah? If you're not aware of it, it's a Netflix show. It's 10 episodes. It's really interesting. I'm not giving anything away. It's about a guy who shows up, and he's very Christ-like. He looks like Jesus, and it appears that he performs miracles, and how the world reacts. And he spends time in the Middle East, and he comes to America, and how everybody from the CIA to religious zealots, people who think he's a con man, people who think he's the Messiah, and he doesn't ever say who he is or isn't. He doesn't say much. And when he speaks, kind of like Jesus did in parables. It's a fascinating show, really interesting. So how would the world respond to a possible Christ-like character in today's world? It's a very interesting show. Okay. The name of the coach is T.J. Woodward. Here, I'm going to put this, somebody asked for this. So my coach is T.J. Woodward, and his book is Conscious Recovery. And the book that Aaron was talking about, that I am reading, is Bruce Lipton's book called The Honeymoon Effect. All right. I'm going to go back to our list because we still have quite a few more things, but I'm loving the conversation and loving everybody sharing. All right. Next up is, do you lead by example? Being an inspiration rather than trying to fix, heal, or change the other. And boy, isn't that easier said than done, right? Especially with children that are watching everything you do. I just so appreciate how hard it is to be a parent. How do you do with not taking things personally? We talked about Emily today. That is her superpower. Emily was amazing at not taking things personally. Really remarkable with it. And again, cultivating that self-esteem, and underneath it also, we don't take things personally if we're able to recognize that anything someone says or does is an attempt to meet some precious needs. So that's what's helped me to reduce taking things personally. I still do sometimes. But if we recognize that anything anyone says or does, they're trying to meet one of their needs. They're trying to meet one or more of their needs and values. And that's a way to shift our way of seeing it. So it's not about how I'm feeling about it or how I'm interpreting it, but what's really going on for this other person. In a way, that might be kind of the 10-second miracle that Laura was talking about, right? The miracle is really looking at what their intention is. And it's rare that a person's intention is to hurt us. Very rare. How do you do with recognizing when you're stepping outside of your personal integrity to make the other one happy or to avoid uncomfortable feelings and conflict? This, by the way, is my definition of enmeshment. When do we go over the line into unhealthy codependence or unhealthy enmeshment? It's when we've stepped outside of our personal integrity in order to make the other one happy or to avoid them being unhappy. And I'll come back to you after this one. How are you at committing to taking a regular personal inventory? Self-reflecting, really meditation, self-reflection, really looking at what's going on inside of me and my choices. Where am I giving my power away? Where am I having an impact on others, positive or negative?
Scott, can I add about, I think there's accountability factor on that also on personal inventory, because sometimes the people, like I know when I have somebody that I'm accountable with, then they might even be able to have more little pieces that might have humor around further ownership that I might not even have been conscious around.
I like that. Do I have a coach, therapist, or friend Who holds me accountable? Would that be accurate way to put it here?
I wouldn't say who holds me accountable, but who I'm accountable with, because holding is like the person, I'm giving that to the person. And for me, it's more like they're just shining a tiny little light to help me. Like, are you sure? Are you sure that that's where you're coming from with all of that? So
beautiful. You're the Mimi is in there. That's you will live forever in this document. So what's come up for people in these last few ones? Anything come up, Laura?
So this is a really interesting thing that I noticed, and I wrote it in the chat box, but sometimes I make amends like a little bit later because my inner being wants to punish a little bit, and also, but it was afraid to say it in the moment. So I'll just give an example. We were watching Sense8, and sometimes some of the people I watch it with, they're making comments about everyone's bodies, and right, everyone's 30 and we're not. So then I made,
and they're all very beautiful in that show. It's definitely,
right, yeah. And then I made a little dig later on, but then I noticed that the next day I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry I made that dig about this guy's body," and they were like, "What are you even talking about?" And I was like, my ego was still trying to just be known or punished, kind of, and I went, "Whoa, Laura, some things you don't have to share," right? It was something I had to source within myself, so it was like my little shadow side. Because I was too afraid. But I noticed when I said the comment, even though nobody else noticed it, I noticed the pain inside of me. Well, I said, well, that guy's got a great body, right? So, and then the next day I wanted to make the amends, but it was still coming from a selfish place of insecurity. That's...
Thank you so much. Who can relate, huh? Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else have anything you want to share that's come up on the last little set of things? Mandy and Israel, are you guys relating to this? Yeah? Cool.
We keep having all these, like, y'all are saying stuff, and we're just like, this is so profound.
This is a good thing.
Oh, good.
Here, like, I'm still listening.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, it's awesome.
Good.
I hadn't had dinner, so we ordered pizza, but we've been listening nice and loud and to everything and kind of discussing as things come up, and it's really cool.
It really is formulating this for Mandy's relationship.
Yeah. You're learning all the things. Alice, anyway, it's good to have you guys with it. And I love when couples are watching this stuff. I mean, it's really, really fun. So I love when Rob is with Laura. I enjoy when Israel is with Mandy. So, and maybe someday Daniel's partner will join us. Allison, you had your hand up.
Well, to that point, in myself, that I need to be very careful in all of my self-reflection that I am not getting into a patronizing role with my partner who has not maybe had exposure to as much of this information. And I really have to check myself, because sometimes I make assumptions about what we as adults understand about communication or whatever, and it comes off sounding kind of patronizing, and that's one of his triggers. So I'm just I'm gonna just leave that there. That's
I like that. I think it's a good warning for all of us, because we can use our understanding of compassionate communication or emotional intelligence skill building. We can use it as a weapon to prove that we're right and they're wrong, or we're smarter, or we're more spiritual, or we're more whatever it might be. And I think that's a very real, I know I've fallen into that. Absolutely, I've fallen into that. And most of you will find your lovers at some point are going to say, don't coach me. I don't want to be coached by you, right? Right? I don't want you to teach me compassionate communication, right? So it's a tricky one. It's definitely a tricky one. So thanks for pointing that out. Laura.
this, I'm sorry, but you know, Byron Katie always says, if you think somebody needs the work, you need the work. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, that's true for everybody but me. All right, we'll go back to our little list here.
Can I just check on a Prabhu? Did you still have something to say? Because I remember Scott saying he couldn't see everybody raising their hand. And
Oh, yeah,
I saw you raise your hand.
I did actually have something to say. Yeah.
Good catch there, Anna Cabrera. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Anna Cabrera. My sister taking care of me. Oh, that feels good. Yeah, it was the part where giving our power away, and then where am I having impact on others? And I find, you know, for one example is, you know, I have a band. I've had a band, and usually all my bands have men in them. And so it's like, it's really a delicate balance as a woman with all males in the band, having like, and it's my band, so I'm in kind of, I'm in charge of it. And how to balance, like, I'm in power, but then, you know, you can't be like, especially as a woman, it's also tricky. I'd suggest everyone watch that movie Bombshell. Actually, have you seen it, Scott?
I haven't seen it. Of course, I'm familiar with it. I want to see it before the Oscars.
Okay, you really everyone has to see that movie. All the women, especially, and the men. And, you know, so, but it's like how to balance this power that's there. So I'm present, but not, you know, because what I say has impact. And then as a woman, how you speak is really different than when a man speaks to each other, right? So it's a very, very, you know, and I just had a situation with a lead guitarist, which I don't know if you guys know about lead guitarists. Let me tell, but, you know, but, you know, was a good friend. And, you know, it's just very, very tricky talking with them and on women and the balance of power and how much power I have. And I really have to walk that. I'm really aware of it all the time, I must say. You know, I mean, I must say one time, just to say what came up right now, just on an emotional level. I remember years ago when I was we were having a gig up in Quebec, Montreal. And we're in the car, and the main singer at the time was always late for rehearsal. And I'm like, okay, so this time everyone has to be on time. We've got this gig. You've got to show up on time. And this seems pretty, really just basic. We're getting paid for this gig. We're in Quebec. We're all together, got the flights. And I felt, and I grew up in this alcoholic family, right? When you said really what's important or what you needed, you got hit often. I would get hit, right?
Whoa.
And I felt a slap come from, you know, from these guys. I felt like a hit. Not that they did it, and maybe it was my veils of past pain, but that's just coming up right now. Is this like, maybe my veils of past pain about like saying what's really saying what needs to be said. But then when you're saying what needs to be said, maybe how it's just my veils of past pain, I'm just feeling like I'm going to get hit for that, you know? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's that fine balance with women and power and communication. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just along those threads, culturally, we could spend forever talking about all the cultural history of when anybody threatened the patriarchy, whether it was the Christian patriarchy or the East Indian patriarchy or just about any patriarchy. You know, a woman who threatens the patriarchy would get stoned, raped, burned alive. I mean, really horrific. There's a genetic memory that we carry, and especially women carry, of standing up to a patriarchy and paying just a horrible price for it. Okay. Well, I'm loving the depth of conversation here. And anybody else before I go back to our Mimi?
I too have something I'd like to add. Yes, on that part about there's this thing that I have around people moving from dependency, codependency, interdependency. And one thing that I'm recognizing is that, and what I appreciate is an invitation to welcome people into conversations with more depth and more empathy. And my hostility that I noticed, which increases significantly, is when when people want to have conversations about blaming, but they don't want to take part in deeper empathy conversations. They just want to stay in they want to engage, and they want to stay engaged in another form of communication. And so in that way, you were talking about this person, Byron, somebody had mentioned the Byron person.
Byron Katie.
Yeah, Byron Katie. For me, what I'm recognizing is actually, I think that it's kind of important that that generally speaking, people there's a way to create invitation for more of these conversations to happen, and on a deeper level, because of the challenges that I'm seeing around the world. And so I just had I had a lot around that. I'm like, actually, I think there is a responsibility for people to step up. It shouldn't just be on a few people to kind of figure this out for the planet. I'm happy to be on the team that's helping to figure these things out, but I want to figure out more invitational conversations.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, how are we at committing to taking responsibility for mistakes, consequences, and hurtful behavior? And I'll be honest, this is one of the hardest ones for me. This is where I would probably give myself the lowest score. It's really challenging for some people, like me, to acknowledge when we've made a mistake that's had a hurtful consequence on somebody else. So, owning your part and your piece in every conflict or upset, choosing love, even when the other is withholding love, making wrong, or stuck in a victim story. How do you do with that? I also have one of those little, I don't know why, but I've got like a little circular ball that's not letting me move. I'm going to stop the screen share for a minute, just because I have a little wheel of doom going around. So yeah, how do you do with that? How do you do with really taking responsibility for the impact of choices you make when it has a hurtful impact, especially on people you love? And honestly, I think this is like the hardest thing in relationship, is not to defend ourselves, not to defend why we did what we did, but to really be present to the impact of a choice we've made on another person. It's so hard to do that. I think I talked about this in a previous class, the 6 Ds. Defending, distracting, dominating, deny. What are the other two? Does anybody ever remember the other two of the 6 Ds, the things we do?
Did you say dismiss?
Dismiss, thank you.
Diminish.
Diminish, thank you. Right. Defend, distract, dominate, deny, dismiss, and diminish. Those are all things that we can do that our ego will choose to do to protect us from taking full responsibility for the impact of something we've done that's had an impact on another person. Oh, gosh darn it, I keep getting the little circular thing, which doesn't let me move it up. Look at why that is. Okay, there we go. All right. How do you do with committing to living in your authentic self and truth? I think this is what really Angel was talking about earlier, about self-love is being able to express yourself honestly. So how do you do it living in an authentic self and truth rather than fitting into an image of what you think you need to be in order to be accepted and loved? How do you do with that? That's a big one. That's a big one. I mean, that's a lifelong lesson for many of us, isn't it? How do you do with knowing how to clear your withholds and your resentments to keep any relationship empowered in healthy connection with the other?
Can you say more about that, please, Scott?
Sure. So, quite often, when we withhold pain, we develop resentment. Signs of resentment are passive aggressive behavior, snarky comments, sarcastic comments. When we find ourselves doing that, or we're with somebody doing those things, it's because they have withheld upset. They've withheld processing. And so it begins to build inside of a person. Another one is a person who stuffs, and then they explode in a rage of anger. And all of a sudden, like the slightest thing to you, it's like something small, but it's a match that lights this big explosion. So learning in our relationships that if we're truly bothered by something and it's nagging at us, we've got to learn how to move it. We got to move that energy, either within ourselves or by talking to the other person, right? And it's an art form, learning how to clear resentments without constantly processing several hours a day. So a lot of it is an inside job, but then there are some things that we really need to be able to talk to our partner about. But if we don't, then the resentments build and the relationship gets toxic. Does that sound familiar to people? Yeah. Any thoughts about that? Anything? Anybody want to? Okay. Laura, and then Anaprava.
Of course, here it's inner child night for me. So, it's just really like Rob just said. He goes, a lot of times if I notice Rob's like acting out or something, or maybe being a little snarky or bratty, I just say, honey, is there something going on? And I just say it really loving, looking into his eyes. And I don't want an answer right then, but I just think it's a good place to linger, because when you grow up in a house where nobody asked you and you didn't know how to source any of your feelings, right? So I notice if I'm upset, my body turns a certain way. And it's just becoming aware of that, but it's so scary because you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to, how do you know when to talk about it? Is it a big deal? Should you really talk about it? But, if your body's reacting, then it has to be maybe a tiny bit addressed, and then until you can work it out with the person. But it's scary.
It is.
Yeah.
And creating time. That's why I often suggest to, Anaprava and then Allison in a minute, I often suggest to people, create like a weekly time when you're well-resourced, like a Sunday, where, for an hour, we're going to kind of talk about what's working. We're going to do celebrations, but we're also going to, talk about things that we're bothered by or things that weren't working the way we wanted. And to find that balance. So it's not an hour-long bitch or gripe session, but we balance it by celebrating what's working and acknowledging or mourning what isn't working and talking about it from that perspective, but making sure you do it when both people are well-resourced.
I just have one more comment that's worked for Rob and I, and I've never been able to have it work in another relationship. But with Rob and myself, I think it's absolutely made us have a great relationship, and I think he'd agree. But we set up the 5-minute girl, because the girl has the emotional read usually, emptying her basket. And it's all my fears and worries, but they're not about him, but it could be about our life. And then he gets this emotional read on what's going on, and we don't say anything after the 5 minutes, and he'll sometimes go, honey, it's 4 minutes and 50 seconds. And then, so I got 10 more seconds, right? And then over like the next week, he starts doing whatever he can, and we don't have to talk about everything, but he gets an emotional read and my little pressure relief is relieved. What would you say about that for our relationship?
Oh, I'd say that, like she said, I've never had it with anybody else. I don't know that that I didn't care about what the other person was thinking. It may have come across that way, but the epiphany is I'm married to myself, and she's I don't even know how to say this.
What?
Right.
It's okay.
Well, I mean, we're both married to ourselves.
Right. We're married to ourselves first, right?
And we're not looking to see what's actually going on for the other one, because you're two inside yourself.
Right.
So when we do this empty the basket thing, I get to see clearly what's going on for her. And it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah. And the last but not least thing I'll say that I think has really worked for both of us is that he gets to see his beautiful woman that he loves walk away just a tiny bit happier. And when a guy can make a woman happy, and he doesn't have to say a word, he just has to deeply look at me, and he can be thinking she's freaking crazy. He doesn't say that, and or poor thing, right, or whatever he's thinking. But his being as a man, he notices that he's able to make me happy, and that's all he's got to do. And it builds this trust between us. And what I notice is then he starts saying things over that week that he maybe wouldn't feel safe to say, because we're building a safety trust about expressing that 10-second miracle thing. Yeah. Anyway.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And emphasis on the words emptying the basket, right? Emptying the, Ann West calls it emptying the jug, right? So that's beautiful. Anna Prabha, and then Allison.
Yeah, that was really beautiful, Laura. And I love Laura's, maybe we grew up in a same household or similar one, so I have a lot of connection, I feel, with you. But this point that she made of didn't know how to source her feelings, right? It's huge, like what am I actually feeling? Because, am I even important, enough to have feelings? And even I can imagine I diminish my own feelings because it wasn't safe to have those feelings. So saying all that, coming into having resentments and wanting to clear resentments, I could see where I do, first I start to diminish that. Is that even worth talking about? Am I worth is that person going to take me seriously? Am I going to be too much? Would they diminish me, or deny, right? And then the fear would come up around that, of being diminished, of being denied, of not being seen. And then is that worth the pain of that versus just not even talking about it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so a lot of fear comes up when it comes to clearing resentments. And so that's what happens when I'm in the process of clearing the resentments.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability on that. Yeah, big twinkling for Anna Prabha. I'm really appreciating Anna Prabha, Laura, and all of your vulnerable sharings. Remember that when we're wanting to have a difficult conversation, we have to have the intention, the purpose of this conversation is to improve my relationship with you. If I'm wanting to clear resentment, it's really important for me or for whoever it is, the intention isn't to tell you that what you did was bad, stupid, or wrong. The intention is to have a better relationship with you, and I'm just wanting you to understand how your choice impacted me. Not to make you bad, stupid, wrong, not for guilt, but so we can understand each other more fully. And that's why it's equally important to understand why he or she did what they did. When I'm working with a couple where there's been infidelity, you've probably heard me say this before, but it's like the perfect example. It's about the hardest thing to cope with. You've discovered that your spouse has had an affair. And to get through that, let's say it's the man who had the affair. The husband's job is to kind of do what Laura was just describing, absolutely hold total space and be present to the shock and the pain and the hurt of his wife. That's what he needs to do. He needs to, not from a place of guilt, but really understanding and feeling with her pain. But the wife has to then be equally interested in understanding why he had the affair. She doesn't have to agree with it. She doesn't have to like it, but she does need to understand what was going on for him. And if she can drop into understanding what she doesn't want to understand, and if he can drop into feeling the pain that he doesn't want to feel, that's when the miracle occurs. That's when a deeper intimacy takes place. So, Allison, you want to say something?
Well, I guess we're all going really deep into our own realities in our responses, and I just wanted to thank everyone. And Scott, I thought that was a beautiful explanation of how to cope when you're coaching someone where there's been infidelity, because that it feels like a minefield to me. It's kind of a scary thing to think about trying to facilitate that discussion. So I really appreciated that. I grew up with my mother who was emotionally abused her whole childhood, and my father who was from a very loving family that nevertheless didn't really talk about feelings. So my parents decided that the only way forward was to talk about everything, but they didn't know about connected timeouts. So when I was a little girl, if anybody had an issue, then everyone had to stay at the dinner table until it was resolved.
Wow.
And sometimes we'd be at the dinner table for like 5 hours.
Oh my God.
Allowed to leave. So I have trauma around, like, should we even start this? Because I'm going to be trapped. And in my feelings and in my discomfort, and I won't get a chance to come up for air because it's just going to go on and on and on. That's my little inner child.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it's really important to talk about things. But I'm realizing now, as I listen to all of you, that when I go back to visit my family, even though we're all adults now, I kind of contract into this person with no needs that can be voiced.
Wow.
Because I'm so afraid of being trapped in a never-ending conversation that just escalates and escalates until everybody's left wounded and vulnerable and shaking. So I am realizing in listening to this just how important it is to allow for connected timeouts. And I know you've said this so many times, Scott, and it's really home in a different way for me now, because I had not looked inward enough to see how I could learn to give myself a connected timeout without going anywhere. I could just go inward and give myself that. I feel like maybe I need to learn how to do that more in my adult relationships now. And bye, Daniel. We'll miss you. Thanks for being
Yeah,
here.
Daniel, I see that you have to leave. So thank you for your wisdom and your presence with us. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody. This is so beautiful. So deep.
See you Saturday.
Okay.
Okay, we do have actually 9 more to go through, and I'd like to be done by 8 o'clock. So I'm going to kind of whip through them a little bit, and we're not going to be able to have as much time for discussion because I do want to keep this to 2 hours, but I'm loving the conversation. I'm loving everybody's vulnerable sharing and wisdom. How do you do at seeing everything outside of yourself as an opportunity to bring it back to self-reflection, self-inquiry, and self-ownership? How do you do with empowering each other in all aspects of life? That's a really important one. Not having the relationship just be about the relationship, but really being support people and finding ways to empower, their interests that have nothing to do with you, to empower, each other in all aspects of life. And that to me is one of the most important things in a long-term marriage or a long-term friendship is number 35, empowering each other or supporting each other. I'm going to say empower and or support. Support. How do you do at recognizing when you're falling into patterns of playing victim to get your needs met? Complaining, colluding, seeking excessive empathy or validation to back up your story that keeps you suffering and in pain. Again, how do you do it getting clear? What am I really needing? How can I empower myself to get this met? How do you do it focusing on love, gratitude, and appreciation rather than the deficiency of what's wrong or not enough in self and in others? And if you're challenged with number 37, please take Debbie Garcia's course. I'm going to stop the screen share for one moment, because Debbie truly is the goddess of gratitude. And as I get to know her and hear about the challenges of her life, what she's gone through, and how she really, truly is grateful all the time. So Debbie is starting up her course again. And if you're really wanting to improve your gratitude and appreciation, please take Debbie's course. Very, very important. Debbie, while I'm pitching it, when's it going to start?
Well, we're combining it with Relationship Essentials, so which is great. And what I can tell you, when we look for what's good, we start seeing what's good. It's really simple. Yeah, gratitude is alchemy. But it started February 29th.
Okay, cool. At the end of February. All right. And by the way, I'll share on Saturday, kind of at the start of the day, I'll share a little bit about what we said about the next course and all of that. We're kind of hammering out, figured out the details, and I'll also put it into writing to all of you. All right. How do you do at refraining from fighting or arguing? Again, committing to using connected timeouts to stop the escalation. Really, please, 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 please do use connected timeouts. What do you do at using your vulnerability as a superpower? We've seen that today. You know, so many of you have really shared vulnerably. And isn't it wonderful as you share vulnerably to feel more love from us, more connected to, you know, it's now, of course, we're blessed that we've got this community where we kind of speak this language of compassion, but being able to use vulnerability as a superpower, really openly sharing your feelings authentically and supporting and celebrating others when they do this. This is emotional intimacy. Again, that's an example. The example I gave about working with a couple that dealt with infidelity. Well, she has to be vulnerable enough to express her pain. He has to be vulnerable enough to feel it with her. He has to be vulnerable enough to show why he had the affair. And she has to be vulnerable enough to try to understand it. Super vulnerable, that actually creates the emotional intimacy miracle necessary to save the marriage or save the relationship. How do you do with taking the time to regularly mourn or acknowledge your unmet needs and celebrate the needs that are being met, appreciate each other, and give each other reassurance? There's a practice that we have in Love Coach Academy called CRAMs, celebrations, reassurances, appreciations, and mournings. And we'll definitely go through that in before this course is over, how to do CRAMs. How do you do with taking responsibility for the consequences of your actions, choices, and behaviors on yourself and on others? And finally, how do you do it aiming to always remain a student throughout your relationships? Always curious, always learning, always growing. So these are the qualities that we're cultivating in Love Coach Academy, in compassionate communication, in this course. It's nice to see Mimi's little ones, two little ones there, one furry and one humanoid. Good to see you. So there you have it. Yeah, Any final thoughts? Anything anybody wants to share, Laura?
I just want to say, Scott, wow, what an amazing, amazing awareness class. I mean, just the full range of how to have a more compassionate communication life, and how do we also allow the space where we're still, like you just said, learning and forgive ourselves and to celebrate that we're still trying. And I don't know, this makes me cry, and I want to say thank you, Scott. I'm just giving you so many hugs because this is such a gift, and I just appreciate all you guys. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, that's a beautiful way to end for me, at least. And I'm going to go get some dinner. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you on Saturday. Thank you for being part of this class. Thank you for sharing honestly and vulnerably. And I look forward to seeing you in a few days. See you on Saturday.
Thank you all so much.
And let's wait for the ducks to come, everybody.
That's right. Feed those ducks.